again and again, the people who say that Israel is killing women and children are apologists for at best and supporters for at worst, a group that videoed themselves killing women and children. And many of the people who say that the Israelis, many of the people who say that the Israelis are doing this are the same people who say that Hamas did not. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's another level of the psychopathy now in the West. Mm-hmm. It's like, I've said repeatedly since the 7th, you know, what did we have in the 2017 period? Believe all women. Mm-hmm. Turned out, don't believe women if they're Jews. Mm-hmm. Don't believe it then. Don't believe it if the rape is caught on camera by Hamas and they're boasting of it. Don't believe them. But then, a year down the road in the war in Gaza, these same people who deny that Hamas raped women on the 7th will say that Israeli soldiers are raping women in Gaza. Every single time it's some form of projection,
well, and that's that last-ditch attempt to...
Here is what they want you to forget. Some enemies can't be reasoned with. Douglas Murray reveals the West's fatal flaw, projecting our values onto a death cult that craves annihilation. A tiny nation chooses life, while the world cheers its destruction. Are we witnessing the fall of the first domino? Choose your side. The values you defend will determine whether civilization survives.
This is something that many of us noticed and had warned about for years, but the fruit of this education system, the fruit of this indoctrination was October the 7th. And look at it, it's been it was a catastrophe for the Israelis, and it's turned out to be an utter disaster for the citizens of Gaza.
There's an immaturity and self-centeredness about psychopathy that's probably intrinsic. So, and it does vary to some degree with temperament. Like, there are violent 2-year-olds, and most of them are socialized by the time they're 4. And the ones who aren't are never socialized. They burn out in their 20s. But immaturity itself is egocentric and pleasure-seeking and power-dominant. And there's no reason to assume that you couldn't maximize that with the proper training. I mean, we train people. Yeah. I know it's a rough realization if your soul is Rousseauian and you believe that there's nothing but good in the heart, even of children. And it's not that I have anything against children, and I think they're delightful, but before they're socialized, they're not social.
Yes.
And so it's not that hard to maintain not being social. And then the consequence of not being social is you're alienated, you trust no one. So then you live in a society where, what's it like to live in a society where you can trust no one, where there's no social groupings, where everyone's hell-bent on destruction? Well, it's going to turn you against the world. And that's a temptation to begin with. You know, in the Cain and Abel story, Cain's temptation is to nurse resentment in consequence of the failure of his second-rate offerings, instead of to learn. And he kills Abel, and he fathers the genocidal masses.
Well, this is one of my...
October 7th was the harvest of Hamas's hate curriculum. Douglas Murray reveals what should be obvious. They indoctrinate their children into a death cult, and you get mass murder, like on October 7th. In Gaza, they perfected this program. This wasn't spontaneous. It was state-sponsored savagery. So how many more dead Jews will it take before the world holds Hamas accountable for the hell they've created?
Conclusions about the nature of, specifically of anti-Semitism, goes back to that Grossman quote, that it acts as a mirror to the failings of the person who suffers from it. So that, for instance, Israel's neighbors could notice that the society is GDP.
The Abraham Accord signatories deigned to notice that, and thank God for some small mercy.
That this country is doing awfully well, considering the existential threat to it constantly from its neighbors since its creation, since literally the minute of its creation in 48.
There's no land except desert. There's no water except
there's no oil.
The sea.
There's no oil. It's the one darn bit of the region where there's no oil. And yet they make a success of it. And if you look around the rest of the region and you see...
colonial enterprise, Douglas.
I know. But you look around the rest of the region, if you were Israel's neighbors in Jordan or Egypt or certainly, Gaza and Saudi, the Gulf, anywhere, it's a perfect subject for resentment.
They're all victims of the colonial enterprise, right? They bear no responsibility for their own misery.
There's endlessly someone to blame.
That's convenient.
That's very convenient.
Very. And someone to hate. That's even better.
And that's a great unifying thing among much more.
And boy, the worst of your people can really delight in that. And you just have to let them loose and encourage them.
But just think about how this has, how taking the wrong route, Cain and Abel-like, has been such a disaster.
Well, Cain's descendants are genocidal, and then comes the flood. Right. That's the progression of the story.
Yeah.
And it's causal.
Yes.
It goes from the failure of the individual, the willingness to turn to resentment and bitterness, and then murderous sadism, and then to be the father of the genocidal masses.
That's one of the reasons why, I mean, as you know, I do get theological in this book eventually, because you can't not.
Israel, a tiny, thriving miracle in a desert of resentment. Douglas Murray slices through the colonialism bullshit. The neighbours can't stand that Israel succeeds while they wallow in victimhood. It's easier to blame the Jews than to fix their own broken societies. This isn't about land, it's about envy and hate. So when will they choose progress over genocide? When will they look in the mirror?
That's the problem with looking at evil.
Yes, that's right.
It's really right. There's.
But it's two things really, Jordan. It's first is that, as you say, I think we agree that it's hard to contend with evil unless you have some kind of theological appreciation of it. But the second thing is, of course, that comes from that is that one of the things I think about in the book is, well, then what's the opposite of that?
Yeah, right. Well, that's the next question that arises, right? That's exactly what would you say? The sequence of thoughts that occurred to me after I spent 20 years studying Auschwitz and the death camps and the Soviet Union and Maoist China. It's like, well, there's hell. There's some way out of that. There's some place that's not that. There's a place that's as far away from that as you could imagine. And there's a pathway to that. Yeah, well, the mythological landscape is the world of good and evil. No doubt about it. So let's turn to the end of your book. That 2 parts, the disconnect, we've covered that to some degree, from defeat into victory. So one of the things that struck me about your book, and I believe this to be the case, is that as Israel goes, so goes the West. The reason that we're all obsessed with that part of the world, when there's many wars we could be talking about, is because, that's where the tire hits the road.
Yes.
If Israel goes, Europe goes.
Well, that's certainly always been my belief. And some people might say, well, how could a state that's not yet 80 years old be so central to the West? And you go, it's not because it's just any other state.
And it's not exactly 80 years old.
No. And so if you realize...
Murray admits you can't stare into the abyss without grappling with good and evil. If Hamas embodies a death cult, then what's the antidote? Peterson asked the right question. How do we find the path away from hell? Murray sees Israel as the canary in the coal mine for the West. If Israel falls, so does the West. When will the West stand up for its own survival?
If you begin to contend with what it is the death cults are onto and what their supporters in the West might be onto, when they call for the destruction of Israel, they always do it as a precursor to the downfall of everyone else in the West. And
like Iran, for example.
Whether it's the Ayatollahs in Iran with the little Satan Israel, great Satan America, Britain, Canada, medium-sized Satans, whether or not it's the Iranian Revolutionary Government doing it for
the protesters are right. Israel is the vanguard of the West.
Well, here's the thing. You see, when students at Columbia, when their group, as well as vandalizing their campus, chasing Jewish students across campus, assaulting janitors and much more, all, of course, in the name of fighting for the oppressed, when they call in their statements for the complete destruction of Western civilization, they do mean it.
The spirit that possesses them means it.
It's just that they recognize that a country of 9 million people in the Middle East, surrounded by countries that wouldn't mind its demise, is an easier thing to destroy than a country of 340 million people like the one we're sitting in.
It's a microcosm of the world.
Right.
You know, it's because the civilized so-called countries of the world are a tiny fraction of the countries of the world.
Yes.
And so Israel, in its existential condition, replicates the condition of the West in a microcosm.
Yes. And of course, one of the, if not the absolutely central things in the West, which is the tradition of the Bible. That the reason, the point I'm getting to is...
You talked about that in terms of the celebration of life.
Yes.
Right? Life more abundant.
The death cults see Israel as the first domino, the fall of Israel as a prelude to the West's destruction. When campus radicals chant for Israel's demise, they're signaling their hatred for Western civilization. This isn't about freedom, it's about annihilation. So when will we recognize the existential threat staring us in the face? We need to defend the values that made the West worth defending.
The point I'm getting to exactly is that when these people, whether it's the protesters in the West or the death cult itself in Hamas, Hezbollah, and others, I think they might have chosen their target well. I think they're onto something. They do know that if you take this out, everyone else is vulnerable next. It's very clever target selection, not just because of size, but because of
theologically
what it means.
Absolutely.
What it means theologically. And that's why I get onto this thing that, you see, again, it goes back to your thing about how ignorant we are in the West about the reality of evil, among much else, is the presumption that everyone wants what we want, for instance, which, among other things, is also just narcissistic projection. I mean, you know, maybe everyone else doesn't want what you want. Maybe they want something totally different entirely. But one of the things...
Like their women to be covered from head to toe so they can only see out one eye and never talk. Maybe they want that.
Maybe they want that.
Since they're pursuing that.
And, you know, one of the things I thought of a lot when I was thinking, when I was covering the... Obviously, this is also, as you know, a first-hand account of Israel's response in the conflict. One of the things I thought about a lot was what the spirit is that animates in response to the death cults. And I realized that it is, it's there in our texts. It's there in the books.
Therefore, choose life.
Therefore, choose life. Deuteronomy. Sure. Deuteronomy. Yeah. Choose life that you and your descendants might live. When I was thinking about that, I thought I was reminded of that phase of the new wave atheists in the 2000s, of which I was distantly a who used to say things like, "Well, the Ten Commandments, they're so obvious. I mean, they don't need to. Why do we need to be told not to murder? Because you were murdering. Because humankind didn't know that you shouldn't murder."
There's envy. We could talk about envy. If you don't think that's an a priori condition, right, you are very naive.
The West is blind to evil because it assumes everyone wants what we want. But the death cults want something entirely different, a world where women are silenced and dissent is crushed. Israel, in its fight for survival, embodies the ancient call, choose life. When will the West rediscover that primal instinct? When will we recognize that some enemies can't be reasoned with?
So I heard that for many years about the Ten Commandments, and it was done in I think, usually naive and flippant way. But when it comes down to this one, literally the commandment to choose life in the face of whatever odds.
Yeah, whatever odds.
As the psalmist says.
That's the story of Job.
Exactly. And as the psalmist says, I shall not die, but I shall live. One of the things that I recount in the book is just the number of examples I came across from people who had stared right in the face of death, right in the face of evil, and who even in the face of it and in the aftermath of it had at the core of their being, I shall not die, but I shall live. And even in a military response, you see the difference between these things. Right,
you talk about Hezbollah breaking apart and everyone fleeing after the leadership is taken out, right? Well, that's why the 100 men possessed of the proper spirit can defeat 12,000 enemies.
Yes.
Because the enemies aren't united by anything transcendent.
One of the things that Hassan Nasrallah, the now late leader of Hezbollah, had said for many years was the jihadist death taunt. He had said it many times. There's a famous time in the 2000s when he says it in a speech in Beirut, when he says, the infidels' great weakness is that they love life. But we love death. And this is our great advantage. He and others around him really meant this. They wanted, just like kidnapping children, kidnapping civilians, they knew that if you go to a society focused on life, even to the extent of the minimization of deaths of their enemies, that if you go for a society that loves life, desires life, fights for life, that you can terrorize them, you can terrify them with your orgiastic celebration of death. But as I described toward the end of the book, as the year of the conflict starts to turn around.
Choose life. The West, in its comfortable secularism, has forgotten the primal force of that commandment. But Israel, facing annihilation, remembers. They choose to live, even in the face of death. The death cults, like Hezbollah, revel in death, believing it's their ultimate weapon. But Murray sees their weakness. A society united by death will always crumble before those who choose to live.
As Hassan Nasrallah goes to meet his maker, from a Beirut bunker, when Sinwar finally crops above ground in Rafah, with only 3 other people with him, one, by the way, a bodyguard who was working for the UN, or UN agency. When Sinwar comes above...
UN.
Yes. Again, Sinwar's bodyguard paid for with our taxpayer dollars. But when the architect of the 7th finally comes above ground in Rafah, which, of course, the military expert Kamala Harris had told the Israeli army not to go into because she looked at the maps. But it turned out when they went into Rafah, they found their enemy. And when you see these people, there is an answer to the death cults. There is an answer to the cult of death, which the IDF has shown is the destruction of their leaders, the killing of the psychopaths who would lead a society in this way, and a demonstration of the values of your own society. Now, that has been incredibly hard because there hasn't been a day I've been with the Israeli Defense Forces in the last year and a half when I haven't seen how they've been operating and then read the world's news the next day and read it as if these were polar opposites of each other. As I say, Israelis enter hospital. Yes, because the hospital was somewhere where there's footage of hostages from the 7th being taken in on the 7th and not for care. Whether it's hospitals, schools, anything else, there was just nothing the IDF could do from the moment they went in, indeed from the moment before they went in, when they were not going to be misrepresented by the world's media in a grand way. But, and I've been asked many times in the last year and a half, why are the Israelis so bad?
Douglas Murray declares there's an answer to the death cult, to destroy their leaders and demonstrate your values. The IDF's actions are constantly misrepresented by the media. They enter hospitals to find hostages, not to destroy them. Despite the world's distortions, the answer lies in destroying the psychopaths, leading the death cult, and demonstrating the values of your own society.
Communicating the truth is, it's extremely hard to communicate what you're doing to a world which in significant part has already decided that you're the bad guy.
And one that's manipulated as well, very profoundly, by the actors behind the scenes. And all the things that we talked about play into this. The refusal of the West to admit to the existence of malevolence, our inability to understand the difference between a just and an unjust war, our willingness to hide in the shibboleth that war is bad, which is hardly a moral claim at all.
No, I mean, I would say that people, there's a saying, I quote somebody saying the book is sort of idiot British student survey, in which a large number of people said they wouldn't be willing to fight for their country, even if it was under existential threat, And
Well, they've been taught that.
well, yes, and when you dig down on the reasons why they said they wouldn't even be willing to fight for their country under existential threat, as the young men and women of Israel have had to do for the last 18 months, the most common reply among young British people of the same age was, war doesn't solve anything.
Right. Or, yeah. Well, and you think about how easy it is to make the moral claim, for example. I've heard many people make this claim. I'm against the death of women and children. As if that's some sort of moral claim.
Well,
as if that's not the basis of common humanity. No one can capitalize on that.
Yes.
On that profession of their morality.
Well, and the other one I come across is people, by the way, and they don't really mean it, by the way, because again and again, the people who say that Israel is killing women and children are apologists for at best and supporters for at worst, a group that videoed themselves killing women and children. And many of the people who say that the Israelis, many of the people who say that the Israelis are doing this are the same people who say that Hamas did not. I mean, that's another level of the psychopathy now in the West.
It's nearly impossible for Israel to communicate the truth to a world that's already decided they're the bad guy. The West refuses to admit malevolence, can't distinguish just from unjust war, and hides behind the cliché that war is bad. Many won't even fight for their own country. When will the West wake up to the real threat? When will we see through the lies and stand for truth?
I've said repeatedly since the 7th, what did we have in the 2017 period? Believe all women. Turned out, don't believe women if they're Jews. Don't believe it then. Don't believe it if the rape is caught on camera by Hamas and they're boasting of it. Don't believe them. But then, a year down the road in the war in Gaza, these same people who deny that Hamas raped women on the 7th will say that Israeli soldiers are raping women in Gaza. Every single time it's some form of projection.
Well, and that's that last-ditch attempt to...
Murray sees it raw, and clearly it's all projection. The West is projecting its own darkness onto Israel. When will we confront our own demons? When will we stop blaming the victim? So, any thoughts on what Douglas Murray just discussed? Share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so that you never miss any of our future debates.